the Collider Collision Series with Jamie Sunsbach, sponsored by Collider's sustaining sponsors. Thank you for believing in the entrepreneurial ecosystem of Rochester, and donors like you. So welcome everybody to the Collider Online Collision Series. This is a virtual series of discussions by and for entrepreneurs open to the Rochester community and beyond. I'm Jamie Sunsbach, the Director of Operations here at Collider, a Rochester-based nonprofit really whose mission is to support our local entrepreneurs with innovative events, education, space, and storytelling to help foster an inclusive, diverse, and healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Just a reminder that today's session will be recorded and will be available via our YouTube and Facebook pages, as well as our online news site, Rochester Rising. The format will be about a 10-minute presentation by our guest, followed by a Q&A for the balance of the hour. Please mute yourself if you haven't already, and if you want to ask a question during the presentation, if something comes to mind, please use the chat function in Zoom located at the bottom. You'll see a chat window that you can pop up. Please submit any questions during the Q&A or during the presentation, and we'll kind of take those in the order that they come during our Q&A. So today I'm really excited. We're privileged to have Susan Langer joining us. Where are you, Susan, by the way?
I am at my home in Red Wing, Minnesota.
I forgot to ask if you actually lived in Red Wing. So Susan really divides her time right now between her work at Red Wing Ignite, where I've gotten to know her really, really well and helping to make the world better for entrepreneurs, as well as her startup, Live.Give.Save, which I think we had at 1 Million Cups a couple of years ago. So I've gotten to know her sort of on the entrepreneurial spectrum as well as the ecosystem building perspective as well. Live.Give.Save is a financial technology company which was established in 2016 with a focus on giving and inspiring social good. Their product, Spave, is the first and only all-in-one financial wholeness app that enables anyone to use their everyday purchases to increase their savings as well as to give to causes they care about without changing behavior. Was that a good pitch?
That's a great pitch. Thank you.
Okay, good. So without further ado, here's Susan.
Jamie, thank you so much. And it's so great to see all the familiar faces out there. So thanks for the opportunity. And then thanks for joining. Some of this stuff, a lot of this stuff is going to be familiar to many of you, but hopefully some of it will inspire you to think about how you can share within your networks to help people along this journey and along this path during these turbulent times. I will start. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can do that. We tested it last time and it worked. So let me know when you can see it, when everybody can see it, and I will reduce these things and make it a full screen. Can you all see it?
Yep.
There we go.
Yep.
All right. So the 3 R's of entrepreneurship, what are they? Well, I will tell you that they were inspired by my trip to Africa. I've traveled there many times, but the first trip was in 1995. And if you recall that time, it was right after the genocide, the Rwandan genocide. And then also it was the height of the AIDS epidemic. And at that time, I mean, it was very different to see a new world, but then to see the devastation and the abject poverty that people were living in, but in the face of all of the tragedies that I was seeing. So the genocide and also with AIDS. But what I also learned and I saw and what inspired Live.Give.Save and our product Spave was this extraordinary sense of community and hospitality among the women entrepreneurs that I met. They showed me about what being an entrepreneur was all about and that I'd hope to emulate one day when I aspired to be an entrepreneur. And that's the 3 R's, which is the resourcefulness, resiliency, and relationships. All of those things, as you can relate to, come together in helping us be the best that we can be. And when we don't feel like that, we have a network of supporters to go to. So we'll start with this on the resourcefulness, resiliency, and relationships. So starting out from resourcefulness in this time for us, what is particularly relevant is our situation with the COVID-19 pandemic and how that impacts businesses, in particular our startups. So there's a lot of options and programs that are available through the SBA, through DEED, that are offered, but not really targeted at the startup community yet. But there's a lot of talk about more programming that's ready to come out, and we had hoped that it would be already released this week. And what I'm saying to a lot of people, and for myself in particular, is that we have to stay close to our CPAs, our bankers, and then of course this network, which we will continue to provide resources as we know them and understand them. But most of you are aware of the EIDL program, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program from the SBA. And then there are grants that come with that. So there's a $10,000 grant that companies can get right away. We haven't received ours, but we certainly did apply for it. And the application process, by the way, for the SBA is pretty darn simple. It didn't take me hardly any time at all to apply for it. And you get a number and you just wait to hear from them. So I'm still waiting to hear back. And then there's the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. It says PPL here, but it's PPP. That is only for companies that have had payroll in the last year. And you would have to have been a company and incorporated by February of this year. And so for us, that doesn't work because we don't have a formal payroll. And then there's the small business debt relief that has been out there and available to organizations. And I have links to all of these resources and a guide from DEED that's really helpful here also. But I thought this was really good. There's a lot of money out there that's available, and it's just understanding how to get at it, right? If you have a CFO or if you have an accountant that can help you, that's great. They can do all of that. You've got people, right? But many times, and like myself, we don't. I do have a part-time CFO and she's been helpful, but it's really difficult for us to know where to go to, and that's why it's important to have relationships and to be able to go to organizations and networks like ours through the E1 Collaborative and Collider. So there's $250 billion that's set aside for direct payments to individuals and families, and that's supposed to be directed to us, and it'll either land in our bank account or we'll get a check for it in the supposedly next 3 weeks. 377 billion, 380 billion in small business loans, 260 billion for unemployment insurance benefits. Now I've heard a lot of talk about that's been challenged with you apply for those benefits, but you're not hearing back. So I don't have a good response for that. And maybe we can talk about that when we get to the Q&A section. I'd like to hear from you all what you've heard about that. And then $500 billion in loans for distressed companies. I don't know a lot about that program either. $150 billion to assist states and localities, and another $150 billion for hospitals to invest in equipment and infrastructure, which is much needed, as we know. And then here are some links that I will share when I give you my deck after this, but there's a lot out there. I did call, for example, I called the SBA yesterday with a question about my loan and the status of it. I got someone that answered the phone right away. She was extremely helpful, extremely kind. There were no issues with that at all. So I would share that, that number with your, through your networks, if you have that. So resiliency, mindfulness, you know, where do we get our information every day? How do we start our day? It's easy for me. I'm telling you, I start my day just like I shoot myself out of the bed practically and I get at it. But if I stop and I am more mindful and I try to do a devotion, I try to pray, and definitely try to remember to do some yoga. We have to get ourselves focused and balanced. And the only way to do that is to take the time. And even if it's 20 minutes in the morning to do that. PIIP, I heard this on one of the recent webinars that was put on for mental health, and it's put it in perspective. And how do you frame up for yourself and for your family what's the worst case, the best case, and the likely case scenarios, and to focus on that and to not dwell on those things that are frightening and fearful. I liked this formula: fear times resistance equals anxiety. How can we keep that fear level low? And how can we make sure that the information that we have coming to us is not always negative? And so where do we get that information from is important too. And then there is an acronym I coined quite a few years ago, was COCA: circumstances, options, choices, and attitude. We live in a certain set of circumstances right now that it was completely out of our control. We're born in a set of circumstances, and sometimes we create other ones based on our choices that we make. But we're given a set of options in front of us every day from which to make a choice. Those options can help propel us forward, or they can hold us back. We make our choices from the filters of our lives, where we were raised, and who we surround ourselves with, our education, etc. But the most important thing is that we can define, our experience will be defined by the attitude that we bring to that choice that we make, regardless of what it is. And so being cognizant of our attitude and keeping ourselves with a good attitude will portend a likely positive experience that we have. And then the possibilities thinking. When I worked at General Mills, it was so fascinating to work with these people in research and technology and innovation, and how they would have moonshots. And what are you striving for? What do you want to see in the future? And I appreciated how Mark Cuban put it, America 2.0 and the ultimate reset. We have an opportunity right now to think about what our future is going to look like for ourselves, for our family, for our businesses. And creating that vision is so critical for us to have something to look forward to and to have hope. So having a good mindset in the morning and as we go to bed is important. To keep things into perspective is vital. And then to always have that good attitude that we can bring toward anything that we're facing. I think of those entrepreneurs and all that they had facing them. Every day that they woke up was not just how they were going to conduct their business, but it's putting food on the table, right, for their kids, and to educate their kids, just like everybody is doing at home right now. And in the midst of everything that they had going against them, they could figure it out. But what they did, and one of the secrets that I appreciated most, was that if they were home and they were alone and felt isolated, they had, I don't know if you can see this, but they had these little vessels. This is smaller than the typical one that they have. But in many cases, these women lived in circumstances that their husbands were abusive, and they didn't get out much. And so they would have this, and they could whisper into it their secrets, and there was someone that they could always talk to. So I thought that was kind of cool. But later on, these micro entrepreneurs would come together. And interesting, they repaid their loans at a 99% repayment rate. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. That's amazing. What's the secret and the magic to that? And really, it was about coming together, because as they repaid their loans, when they came together each week, they could talk about their circumstances and their issues at home, and they could find that they weren't alone. So it was much more than the transaction that happened, but more about the relationships that we had, which leads me to relationships. So making sure that you surround yourself with people that inspire you. It is vital that we seek out and invest our time with people that are giving us things, that are inspiring us, that give us life, as opposed to taking from us. We have to do the same to other people, right? Who are your go-to experts that you go to for advice and information? It's really important to keep that strong, keep those relationships strong. And no time better than now to set yourself up and identify who are those experts that I'm going to keep in my stable that I have. And then who can you help? So there's nothing better than when you give of yourself that, that you receive. And so how can we help one another? What is it that we can do to personally or professionally help others? And I think it's interesting that there are, I think, a lot, I know that there are a lot of individuals and entrepreneurs that are in the shadows. And how can we seek them out together? How can we bring them out of the shadows? I'm sure there's a ton of depression that's just starting, and it's only going to get worse. So how can we be relevant and available to them? And then how can we be an exemplar of good, a vessel, a listening ear, a shoulder, a rock for others to lean on? So I've always liked this quote from Winston Churchill: "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." And that's all I have. I do want to say that we're trying to figure out how we can set up mentoring sessions, and I'll be working with Jamie on that. Sounds like you've got a great framework set up for that, but please let anyone know that they can reach out to me via my email or my phone. I would be more than happy to listen and to share whatever I know to help them get through this period of time. I know I've got a great network, and I thank you all. And I have to say, yesterday when we had our meeting, Jamie and Christine and with Will Kitchen, that was fantastic to end my day. Having a sense of humor and being able to share that and keeping one another filled with joy is invaluable. So thank you for that. That's it. Questions?
Great. Susan, if you could unshare your screen. Awesome. Yeah, so we've got one question. Again, please submit your questions in chat. It's an easier way than people sort of jumping in on the audio side and cutting each other off. But our first question comes from Amanda. Is there a hierarchy or order that businesses are encouraged to apply for the grants, these assistance grants? For example, should businesses apply for federal grants before state or local?
That's a good question. I know that I was told to apply for the SBA first, and then someone said apply for everything and see what you end up getting. But I don't know of any hierarchy. I just know that applying for that SBA EIDL loan is one of the most important things that you can do. So no, I don't know of any hierarchy. Maybe somebody else might know.
I know that if you take and apply for the EIDL grant first before the PPP loan, that the EIDL grant loan can then be wrapped up into you can pay it back with the PPP loan. So you have to have put the EIDL in loan first before the PPP.
That's great. And something about you can't double dip.
Right, you can't be for the same exact thing, but yeah. I think they're making this up kind of as they go. So it'll be interesting to see. I know the PPP loan, they have changed the application form a couple of times. And so that's good. That's what I know.
All right, awesome. And next question is from Chris Shad. What has worked for you to be in community? Chris, you need to sentence structure better. No, I'm kidding. What has worked for you to be in community with those who inspire you, or in a community, I would guess?
For me, Chris, it really has been all about working together. I mean, I am fortunate and blessed to have a community that's already set for me with the E1 group partnership. So we're in community and helping one another and sharing information as they come along. That's been vital. I also am part of the CEO Roundtable, which is a group out of the Twin Cities primarily, and we've been meeting once a week at 7:30 and every Monday morning and sharing information about employee benefits, about all of these activities, how they're impacting different businesses. That's been invaluable. And then I've got a women's group, Unicorn 16, that we get together once a month and have happy hour together and share our struggles and our stripes and our challenges, but also the good that's happening. And we try to focus on that. So that's been my community and my church.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's all good. Those sounds like those were existing groups that you had relationship with. If I think about in greater Minnesota, southeastern Minnesota as an example, especially in the smaller communities around the region, entrepreneurs tend to, they don't flock naturally, and they don't necessarily have those existing relationships. So how do we help those individuals that are out there trying to do their thing get connected in ways that are meaningful? They don't necessarily have these existing cohorts that you're connected to.
Right. You know, it's interesting because that call that we had yesterday with Christine, Will, and Jamie, we were saying, you know, how we were going to have a kickoff event this summer at Cascade Meadows in Rochester, inviting entrepreneurs to come in and to learn about the various resources that we have available. Instead, now we're looking at kicking off a series of speakers. So we're calling it the E1 Tech Talk, and then trying to promote that into the various channels. And of course, we do a press release, but having people come in and expert talk about different topics, and then have the one-on-one mentoring that we would be able to offer to them. And we've also talked about having that happy hour. I know, Jamie, you're doing the once a week office hours. But I also know that Forge North is doing something that they're doing a happy hour on Tuesday evenings, and then a coffee talk or something on Thursday morning. So I think having those types of engagements would be good for us to offer. Anyone else?
Well, I think for me, I mean, we're just, really, Collider is built on community. And when we're all stuck at home, we don't have a community. So really what we're doing is by necessity. We want to keep that community. We want to rely on each other. We want to, just do everything we can to support each other through this. That's really no different than what we were doing before. It's just now it's at the forefront of sort of everyone's mind and concern. But to me, the community is just the most important piece of everything.
What are your thoughts, Chris, on that?
I think the video technology such as we're using right now gives us an opportunity to reach people like we never could before. That an event in one town can be, somebody can participate in that event if they're in another town, even if they didn't have childcare for their kids, because now they can connect in remotely. So on the one hand, you've got greater accessibility, and that's something we should find ways to take advantage of, I guess. On the other hand, it's less personal, of course, and finding ways to encourage, like actually picking up a phone and talking to somebody live, as a follow-up, or finding ways to connect people one-on-one might be useful. I don't have a lot of solutions. I just know that, but for my job where I'm connecting constantly, it seems like my business, if all I had was my business, my circle would be pretty small, and I'd be heads down doing things, and I would be missing out on things like this if I wasn't connected to something like this.
Yeah, I share that.
All right. Christine asks, are you seeing any type of local response in Red Wing that's similar to what we're seeing in Rochester with the Roch Strong app, that really focuses on supporting local business? So entrepreneurs getting together to do something, could be other groups in Winona working on mask technology. You're seeing similar things happening in Red Wing.
Yeah, I know that. You mean from a technology standpoint, Christine?
Not as much technology, but more the idea that business owners are really seeking to publicize their needs, and other business owners are really seeking to support those needs as much as possible.
Yeah. Okay, I hear you. Yeah, definitely. We have a number of groups, Facebook groups, that people are very active identifying what consumer or community needs are, and drawing people together to address those community needs, and then promoting the local businesses and gift certificates has been a big deal. I know that Megan Suey, who is our marketing lead at Red Wing Ignite, is also a director at downtown Red Wing. And so she's been working with those groups. She said they're pretty devastated, but they're coming together. I know that they're a resilient group as well, but I don't have any exact programs for you that I know of. But Facebook, I mean, you mentioned Facebook the other day too, that you're seeing more of that being developed. I have been seeing that a lot also. Groups coming together on Facebook.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm noticing a lot more on Facebook even than Instagram or Twitter. You know, people are taking pot shots on each other or sharing the news on Twitter, but on Facebook, they're really saying, hey, look, support this local restaurant that's doing delivery. Here's a picture of me getting delivery from them. Now you go do it, kind of thing.
Yep.
Modeling what they want to see.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
At the same time, I think there's I don't know. I've been a part of certain Facebook groups that are super toxic, around just, you know, that starts out with good intentions of we're just a bunch of entrepreneurs. We want to help each other, and it turns into just this toxic sludge of complaining without any real solutions. So you kind of, and that's with any social media, you kind of have the good and the bad. And so that's something that I've been really searching for, the more positive stuff out there, because like we don't need more negative stuff. And I'm sorry, the community of Rochester, the city of Rochester just can't dump $4 billion to bail out everyone. And, you know, it's really tough when people complain about how they don't have access to resources when they could easily go to the state's website, to deed, to things like that. They choose not to, they just want to complain. So it does get a little toxic, but I've just tried to steer clear of that stuff because it really changes your mood pretty fast. And definitely I would advise anyone, if you start to see a lot of that negativity, if you're on social media, like just stop, because it's just not, it's not worth it. You have so many great things you can give back to the world. Instead of reading that, you could be, you know, buying a gift certificate, you could be ordering food, you could be doing all this stuff than just trolling in a room full of negativity.
Well, that comes to that point too of how are we part of the solution? Are we part of the problem? And so we didn't create this problem, but we, instead of spewing, to your point, the negativity, how as leaders now, most of us on this call are the ecosystem builders, can we help redirect that? So I had a text this morning from someone that was, I mean, definitely a person that is usually very negative and talking bad about this board that he was serving on, and wanted to get together and talk with me about it. I'm like, I'm sorry, but if it's not healthy for you, then I suggest you resign. If you can't get along with people, then you should resign, and then find something that gives you life, that gives you joy, that gives you pleasure, that fulfills you. I mean, those are the things that we have to keep giving people filters back and redirecting and reframing the conversation, I think. Or getting out of it, like you said. What are some of the things that you all are seeing from a mental health standpoint? I mean, my sense is that it's, of course, out there, know that it is. I haven't seen personally a lot of it, and I think that it's just going to get worse and worse, but I don't want to be, you know, I don't want to be negative about it and have a terrible vision of the future. But yesterday, Jamie, you mentioned somebody was crying to you. So are you guys all seeing, you know, this bubbling up, or just anticipating it?
I think I'm seeing it in just, you know, certain circles. And when I talk with people, it's bubbling up. Like you said, it's not, you know, there's that one example was pretty extreme, but, you know, we're starting to see it. And I think it's a lot of factors. You know, I'm a creature of habit, right? I like to kind of have a pattern on how I do things. And this was so hard for me to work from home and to shake that up and to figure out, you know, how do we really make this work with my wife in the next room who works for Mayo, with my kids running around. And thankfully my daughter went back to virtual school on Monday. So that things got a little more tame, but it's funny how fast this house is turning into a co-working space. And so I thought about it that way, and I thought, okay, well, maybe it's not so bad, but I know I personally just had a good week where it was crazy. Like I didn't know how I was going to be able to pull this off. And I think a lot of people went into this maybe with the expectation it wouldn't be, or something miraculous would happen and it wouldn't be, a month or 2 months or more.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think that's starting to settle in. When you have closures of businesses, you have this stuff, I think it really starts to hit people. And then of course, a lot of those people are scared of losing their jobs, and it builds up. So I think it's bubbling up. And I think that's where, the need for sort of mental health services is something that, again, like you, I'm not seeing a ton of right now. At least maybe I'm looking at the wrong Facebook pages, but I'm just not seeing a lot of services being offered, other than like United Way has 211 and things like that, which are fantastic. But I think there needs to be a little more done on the entrepreneurial side of things. And that's something that as a foundation, we feel very strongly about. I think it was something that I think if this would have happened a year from now, we would have had some stuff in place. So it's been a big challenge for us.
Startup space, I'll put that out there. Many of you have heard about that, and they're a startup themselves, and so there's a lot of bugs yet that are being ironed out of that. But I think that that's going to be a really great central repository for information. They hosted a webinar on mental health, and this is why I'm going down this trail, is that they had 3 experts on there talking about how to address some of the anxiety and depression and stuff that we're starting to see, but we feel it's going to be stronger. But unleashed.com was this, his name is Stu Minshew, I think. And he was fantastic. And he focuses on entrepreneurs. Let me see if I've got his website. And it is all about that for entrepreneurs. I can put that in our chat too. But are there other resources that people, yeah, here it is. Equipping entrepreneurs with tools and strategies to manage and overcome fear, anxiety, and burnout. I'm in. And then there are a couple, I think, life coaches now that their businesses are picking up. I'm hearing that from them. And so good for them and that they're out there. I was trying to figure out, are there ways that they can come together and have a collaborative for entrepreneurs and making themselves available?
At the risk of only focusing on one demographic, that might be something we could do at the We Forum, to do a virtual session with some life coaches, health coaches. Not that it would be only open to women, but that's who's on our mailing list.
Right. Oh, I love that. Yes.
That might be an option.
If I think about, like, at our church, we know that people, especially the older people in our congregation, they're going to be harder to connect with. So as a leadership board, we've divvied up the list of everybody in the church, and we're enrolling people who are willing to make phone calls every week. And so everybody's got 10 or so people that they're going to call. And it's just down in the trenches, making a phone call, a couple of phone calls a day to keep up that connection with people. That's hard to do when you've got a very loose coalition of people, like the Entrepreneurial Network of Southeast Minnesota, right? Like, who's going to take charge of that, and who's going to do all that? But some of it is just sort of, I don't want to say hand-to-hand combat, but it's like one-on-one, just reaching out and calling people. And like in that particular community I'm part of, that's how we're choosing to connect with people. And sometimes it's not counseling, it's just somebody to talk to.
Oh,
usually
totally
it
agree.
is, actually, right?
To listen. Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Actually, I think we should I can look at the Red Wing Ignite database and see how many phone numbers we have. And our database is pretty messy, though. We don't know who's an entrepreneur and who's not. But I don't know. That's interesting.
It's a big commitment. I mean, if you're going to do it, you got to do it. And
right, but it doesn't hurt.
right.
You can take, how many, this day I'm going to do it, or this part of my day, I'm just going to make these many calls. And
yeah. Yep.
I agree. It's a good suggestion.
I know our Chamber of Commerce has been active on reaching out and on the small business front and calling small businesses and just kind of wanting to chat with them. And that's something that I've kind of taken, and so I've reconnected with a lot of people and just see how they're doing, and I think it works great. It shows people you care. It makes I've actually made some I would say tighter relationships with people that I normally wouldn't. We would talk in passing or at an event, and I think I've really learned a lot about people this way, which in a way seems counterintuitive that you're not face to face, but I don't know. It's different formats, and like I was saying yesterday in the call, with the E1 call, I think certain people feel more comfortable doing something like this versus others. So it's another mechanism, and I think to Chris's point, something that we can take out of all this is, how do we make sure that this virtual component is a piece of what we do in the future, and we make it, because I think we're really hitting another piece of accessibility for people. Some people, whether they just physically can't be there, or they feel more comfortable doing it, or they have, children at home and they can't find a way to attend something, that we make sure that we're producing quality content that really is accessible to everyone, no matter where they are. And I think that's going to be my big takeaway from this, is I've learned so much on how to produce things like this. And I'm not by any means an expert. I think you have to do quite a few of these. My lighting still sucks, but I think we really, that's something that I want to, I never really thought of is some people really just prefer to do things from a distance, and so we should be inclusive of them as well.
So something that has occurred to me, and I'm just going to throw it out, is that different organizations and different groups have different roles at different phases. And by that, I mean, I think the chamber had the big role up front, chamber and ready, to help people get the money they need to apply for these loans, that kind of thing. But I think a lot of what many of us on this call do in the ecosystem is support people kind of after that, right? So the second and third wave. So we're the ones who are going to come alongside them to help them think through strategies for success, right? So I think a lot of, and that's what I've been kind of pulling back and waiting in this first season, to give what I think are the right people the opportunity to really walk people through, handhold them through applying for those loans and figuring out what to do. But then I think there's going to be a great need for our services, whether that's chat support groups or whatever it is, as we move into that next phase. Does that make sense? So that's where I think we really can do it. And I think that's what the tech talks will do on a tech entrepreneur basis, but we can be doing similar things like that in our region. And I don't know, I hear sometimes that, well, we don't want to have too many things because people have burnout. I'm not sure if that's true, because I kind of feel like the more you have to offer them, the more they can kind of figure out what works for them and their timeline and the groups they're comfortable being in. I mean, quite frankly, I've been on a couple of the chamber calls, and one of the things that hit me right away is there's like 100 people on the call. So most people are not going to say a word, right? They're going to listen and learn. It's educational, but that's not a community forum where they're going to interact. Whereas if we have lots of forums that are smaller like this, more people are going to talk and interact and get their questions answered.
Right.
And just to throw out there so we can all have a cheery thing, I reached out to Brett about the tech talk, and he came back and said yes.
All right. Awesome.
So he said May. He's on for May.
Okay.
So for those of you who weren't part of the E1 call yesterday, Susan or Christine, could you explain what we have kind of cooking with our E1 Tech Talks?
Go ahead, Christine, take it away.
Sure. So, as part of the Launch Minnesota grant for the region, so as part of this collaborative, we want to provide specifically resources to tech entrepreneurs. And as part of that, since we can't do our kickoff event that we had planned to hopefully host early in the grant period, instead we're going to do these virtual tech talks that Susan came up with the name for, which was really cool. And so we'll do hour-long sessions with different types of folks. So Brett, for example, can talk about investing in tech startup. And I'm reaching out to Lisa Lavin about running a med tech startup. And then we've got each of us kind of took on 2 people we were going to reach out to, so that once a month for an hour, we would host these virtual kind of conversations led by a speaker who has some expertise in that. And so the tech entrepreneurs we're trying to reach could start creating community during this time by coming and signing on to these things. So there'll be webinars like this.
Okay.
All right. Is there any more questions? And feel free to just unmute yourself and ask at this point. Oh, come on, people. Susan has answered all of our questions.
Yeah. No. Well, I think it's great that we have a group of people that are so passionate about reaching out to the entrepreneurial sector. They need us, and it sounds like we're all going to be there. So I'm grateful to have forums like this, and looking forward to what's in store in the coming months. We're just going to have to build as we go and pivot, as they say, and iterate.
Fantastic. If someone else, it looks like Chris may have a question. I'm just gonna I'm gonna pop up a poll. This is the first time I've used a poll, so feel free. I think there's one question. This is just a test to see how this works, because metrics, feedback, super important. So I'm gonna launch this poll. Feel free to ask another question. It should just pop up in a window somewhere, and feel free to take a minute to just answer it as someone else is asking a great question.
I have another question, though, that I'm kind of excited about or want to know more about, is how to create subgroups. You have one big conference group, and then can you have subgroups and then bring everybody back together again? Are you aware of anything like that, Jamie, or anybody else?
So you do have the ability here to do breakout rooms. So I've never played around with it, but I wonder if there's a way to do that. Otherwise, I know Zoom has a webinar product that probably is a little more robust than just, this is made for just business talks.
Mm-hmm.
You can do breakout groups on Zoom, because we're doing it for some of our class sessions. But you're essentially setting up different calls for different groups, and they have their own meeting ID. And you have to obviously be on Zoom Pro to do it, not the free one.
Interesting.
So that sounds like you can't then come back together when the breakout is done, unless you dial back into some other meeting.
So it's a little bit, I find it a little bit challenging. So I'm hosting, for example, the overarching class.
Right.
And then I'm sending group leaders the Zoom information that they send out to their class group. And they kind of pull out of my class, go to that one, and then come back to my class. And I have to continue to host the big one.
So they're clicking out of yours and clicking into another one, and then they're clicking out and coming back.
Right. And you have to give them the authority to run a Zoom call with your Zoom login, because you can't be hosting all those subgroups. They have to host them as the leaders.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds complicated.
Yeah, it does.
This has been a new age for online education.
Yeah.
Especially for those of us who were not teaching online, trying to figure out how to pull everybody online.
Speaking of resources, Corey, the Center of Rural Innovation, has had a series of webinars. They had one, and then now another one, I think this Friday, on creating virtual events. And they, on the webinar, and it was one of the old kind, I can't remember what it was called, not WebEx, but something like that. And he could break them out in the same one, but I mean, I know that that's a professional grade program. I'm trying to think of what that was now. Anyway, it'd be interesting for us moving forward in some of these events that we're talking about, and how to come up with a topic and then let people go off and talk in their small groups, and then bring it back and have a leader be able to share.
Yeah, it's not very easy, but yes, it's doable.
Thank you.
Well, I can definitely do some research on that as well. I was trying to get my mind wrapped around the polls first, and then I would one thing at a time with Zoom. All right. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. I didn't know it was going to be an auction, but I think we'll leave it at that then. So, thank you so much to Susan for taking the time to chat with us today. And I guess, Susan, where can people find you to learn more about what you do and with the many hats that you wear?
They can reach me at susan@redwingignite.org or 715-977-1222. And I'll send the deck out to you, I guess, and you can send it to everyone.
Yep, sounds good. All right, so thank you so much. Make sure to follow Collider and Rochester Rising's social media channels for upcoming events over the next few weeks. And for any of you that are members of our co-working space, please also, you can check our Slack channel for those updates as well. So stay safe, everyone, and have a great day. Thanks.